The speech I had originally prepared for this evening is very different to the speech I will be giving. Whilst writing my original speech, I quickly realised that talking extensively about the source of my trauma in an open setting is not something I am ready to do. As a number of women close to me can attest to, the very writing of said speech and then the editing and rereading of it came horribly close to re-traumatising me. So instead of talking about the source of my trauma, I will be discussing the effect said trauma has had upon me. The cost of my trauma, if you will. Kate Rushen says in her piece entitled The Tired Poem, after being offered by a man $10 to have sex with him, and I quote, "You begin to explain how $10 wouldn't pay for what you'd have to give up." End quote. What you give up and the cost of having sex with a man for money will never be covered by the cash he gives you. In the past 6 months alone, I estimate that over $50,000 has been spent on my recovery. This paid for a 6-week stay in a psychiatric hospital, electroconvulsive therapy, group therapy, and one-on-one therapy. That is just the financial cost this year. What else has it cost me? It has cost relationships. It has cost a healthy sex life. It has cost the proper functioning of my body. I have chronic pain from degenerative arthritis in my lower back and knees, from kneeling on cold, hard floors and being tied up in weird positions. It has cost the ability to function normally in society. I cannot work a conventional job and probably will never be able to. It has cost my mental state. It has almost cost me my life on numerous occasions. This is not hyperbole. The cost of male sexual exploitation and violence cannot be quantified and is perpetually damaging. Buyers of sex are disabling women. It has been over 15 years since I stopped being a professional sexual submissive in a BDSM dungeon. I pay for this every day. Something as little as looking in the mirror can trigger a trauma response. Normal, everyday bodily functions can trigger a trauma response. I even discovered, in therapy this week, that eating chocolate mindfully can trigger a trauma response. I was so mired in the belief that I chose to be sexually brutalised by men for money that I lived for 10 of those 15 plus years in a state of severe cognitive dissonance. When I was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder and complex post-traumatic stress disorder, I didn't understand why. I chose to be in the sex trade, right? How could it have traumatised me? Just over 5 years ago, I discovered radical feminist analysis, and I slowly began to realise that I did not choose that for myself. It was chosen for me. By the way I was raised, by the media, by my experiences, by the way men treated me, and most pervasively, by the patriarchy. I was groomed into the sex trade and then professional BDSM by women I loved and trusted. These women suffered from trauma too. Maybe one day I'll be able to forgive them. I don't know. It's much more convenient to have a face to blame rather than an amorphous concept like the patriarchy. Like them, I too have perpetuated the harm of the industry. To the woman who I love dearly that I encouraged to go into prostitution, I apologise. Even if you have forgiven me, I will never completely forgive myself. This is a burden I will carry for the rest of my life, and I have chosen to continue carrying it so that I will never make that mistake again. This year, I have truly started facing the trauma of a life of male sexual exploitation and violence, and it has been tough. To accept what has been done to me, to accept that I can't change it, to accept that I have to face it, to accept that I have to fix it, to accept that denial, dissonance, and disassociation was making me sicker. In order to choose life, I have had to radically accept what was done to me, and though, on the surface, it may have appeared that I chose to be sexually exploited, I did not. Now to speak more broadly. When the sex trade and BDSM are glorified and another woman walks through the door to service her first John, the damage is done. The trauma begins at that moment. Whether she does one session or hundreds of sessions, the harm is irreversible the minute she steps into that room with a man who thinks paying her money gives him the right to do what he wants with her body. Money does not equal consent. There is a prevailing narrative at the moment that if someone objects to BDSM, they are kink shaming. Thanks to books and movies like 50 Shades of Grey, BDSM has become normalised, and talking about it in any way that is deemed negative is taken as an affront to those who bring BDSM into their bedroom on any level. I do not care if a person likes to be blindfolded while they have sex. I do care if a person who likes being blindfolded during sex shuts down a conversation about BDSM using accusations of kink shaming. BDSM is the introduction of coercion, violence, deprivation, control, and abuse into sexuality. It covers a plethora of practices from the aforementioned blindfolding to breath play, a palatable term for choking or erotic asphyxiation. Some of the practices covered by the umbrella term of BDSM appear relatively harmless. Most aren't. More often than not, the seemingly less harmful practices lead to the more harmful practices. It's also important that you're aware that most of the toys used in BDSM are inspired by the tools of torture used in racialized slavery. This is not a topic I feel I am capable to talk about. I don't even know if it's my story to tell, but I want each one of you to know that BDSM glorifies the use of tools of racialized oppression and violence. I often hear women in the feminist community say they could never do it. Some even grimace and say ew or yuck when we talk about our experiences in the sex trade. When you do this, you are othering women like me. When you say it, you do not realise that you are just lucky in that your lives have not taken you down that path. Could you really not do it if you're a single mother with children to feed and rent to pay? Could you really not do it if you're taught that all your worth was in your looks and sexuality? Could you really not do it if you just come out of a long-term relationship with a man who raped you regularly? Could you really not do it if the media taught you from a young age that being paid for sex was a way to empowerment? Could you really not do it if someone you loved cajoled you into it? Could you really not do it if you're homeless? Could you really not do it if you had a history of childhood sexual abuse perpetrated against you? Could you really not do it if one of the women you love and trusted most in the world handed you the book she wrote, glamorizing and romanticizing her time in prostitution? Could you really not do it if you had an addiction to feed? Could you really not do it if you were told you had no other option? I would like to make a plea to the feminist community. When I am in a room of feminists who know aspects of my past, I am othered. This is a common feeling amongst marginalised women in the feminist community. Whether it be women of colour, disabled women, lesbians or survivors, we are all othered. We don't want you to feel sorry for us or walk on eggshells around us. We don't want your sympathy. We want you to help us do the work to fix this shitty system that marginalises us and makes our victimisation possible. Dig deep within yourself. Embrace the ways that you are victimised so the connections between us can all be strengthened by understanding. We are all oppressed by the patriarchy. We are all sisters. The only way we can make a difference is to reach out to each other from our own places of oppression and work together. Don't put us in the too hard basket. I know we cause discomfort, our trauma at the hands of the patriarchy being so close to the surface, but we have all suffered patriarchal trauma at one level or another. It can be used to strengthen the community. I have learnt that speaking about my trauma can help to lessen the shame and anger I feel at what has been done to me. As Kate Rushen says in another of her poems, entitled To Be Continued, if you are what you eat, you'll become what you speak. If you free your tongue, your spirit will follow. Just keep saying it, girl. You'll get whole. Say it again and again, girl. You'll get free. Hopefully one day I will be able to give the speech I originally wrote. I am going to get whole. I am going to get free.